Hello, welcome to the session on Parmenides. Parmenides of Elea was a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher. As the first philosopher to inquire into the nature of existence itself, he is incontrovertibly credited as the father of metaphysics. As the first to employ deductive a priori arguments to justify his claims, he competes with Aristotle for the title Father of Logic. He is the founder of the Eleatic school of thought, a philosophical label ascribed to pre-Socrates, who purportedly argued that reality is in some sense a unified and unchanging singular entity. This has often been understood to mean there is just one thing in all of existence. In light of this questionable interpretation, Parmenides has traditionally been viewed as a pivotal figure in the history of philosophy. The one who challenged the physical systems of his predecessors and set forth for his successors the metaphysical criteria any successful system must meet. Other thinkers also commonly thought of as Eleatics include Zeno of Elea, Melissus of Samos, and Xenophanes of Colophon. Parmenides' only written work is an entitled poem, supposedly but likely erroneously, on nature. Only a limited number of fragments of his poem are still in existence, which have traditionally been assigned to three main sections: Prome, Reality, and Opinion. The Prome, that is prelude, features a young man on a cosmic journey in search of enlightenment, expressed in traditional Greek religious motifs and geography. This is followed by the central, most philosophically oriented section. Here, Parmenides positively endorses certain epistemic guidelines for inquiry, which he then uses to argue for his famous metaphysical claims that what is cannot be in motion, change, come to be, perish, lack uniformity, and so forth. The final section, Opinion, concludes the poem with a theogonical and cosmogonical account of the world, which paradoxically employs the very phenomena that reality seems to have denied. Furthermore, despite making apparently true claims, for example, the moon gets into light from the sun, the account offered in Opinion is supposed to be representative of the mistaken opinions of mortals and thus is to be rejected on some level. All three sections of the poem seem particularly contrived to yield a cohesive and unified thesis. However, discerning exactly what that thesis is supposed to be has proven a vexing perennial problem since ancient times. Even Plato expressed reservations as to whether Parmenides' noble depth could be understood at all, and Plato possessed Parmenides' entire poem, a blessing denied to modern scholars. Although there are many important philological and philosophical questions surrounding Parmenides' poem, the central question for Parmenidean studies are addressing how the positively endorsed radical conclusions of reality can be adequately reconciled with the seemingly contradictory cosmological account Parmenides rejects in Opinion. As with other ancient figures, little can be said about Parmenides' life with much confidence. It is certain that his hometown was Elea, a Greek settlement along the Tyrrhenian coast of the Apennine Peninsula, just south of the Bay of Salerno, now located in the modern municipality of Asea, Italy. Herodotus reports that members of the Phoenician tribe established this settlement 540 to 535 BC, and thus Parmenides was of Ionian stock. Parmenides' father, a wealthy aristocrat named Pyrrhus, was probably one of the original colonizers. Parmenides remained a lifelong citizen and permanent resident of Aelia. Several sources attest that he established a set of laws for Aelia which remained in effect and so on too for centuries after his death. A pedestal discovered in Aelia is dedicated to him with an inscription crediting him not only as a natural philosopher but as a member of a local healing cult. Thus, he likely contributed to the healing arts as a patron and practitioner. Finally, if Parmenides really was a personal teacher of Zeno of Aelia, Parmenides must have been present in Aelia well into mid-4th century BCE. However, when and where Parmenides died is entirely unattested. Work. Parmenides' only known work, a poem written in hexameter verse around 475 BC and entitled On Nature, has only survived in fragmentary form with approximately 150 of the original 3000 lines of text remaining today. It is divided into two main sections describing the two ways or two views of reality: the way of truth and the way of appearance or opinion, along with an introduction. Parmenides argued in favor of the way of truth and against the way of appearance. In the poem, Parmenides argued that the everyday perception of the reality of the physical world is mistaken and that the reality of the world is the one and unchanging, ungenerated, indestructible whole. Likewise, the phenomena of movement and change are simply appearances of the real, static, eternal reality. He further asserted that the truth cannot be known through sensory perception, only through pure reason. Parmenides set out the heart of his case in a worldview that is, according to Aristotle, near to madness. He argued as follows: what is not does not exist. Since anything that comes into being must arise out of what is not, objects cannot come into being. Likewise, they cannot pass away, because in order to do so, they would have to enter the realm of what is not. Since it does not exist, what is not cannot be the womb of generation or the tomb of that which perishes. The no longer and the not yet are therefore variants of what is not, and so the past and future do not exist either. Change then is impossible. Equally, his argument continued: multiplicity is unreal because the empty space necessary to separate one object from other would be another example of what is not. And since things cannot be anything to a greater or lesser degree, the universe must be homogeneous, a single, undifferentiated, unchanging unity. Also, it must be finite and spherical, for it cannot be in one direction any more than in another. Thus, by a strictly deductive argument, Parmenides asserted that change is impossible and that coming into existence or ceasing to exist are likewise impossible, so that everything that exists is permanent, ungenerated, indestructible, and unchanging. His argument refutes all accounts of the origin of the world and represents the early type of monism. Parmenides therefore made the ontological argument against nothingness, essentially denying the possible existence of a void, which led Leucippus and Democritus to propose their theory of atomism specifically to contradict his argument. The philosophy. The distinction between the way of truth and the way of seeming is the first attempt in Greek philosophy to distinguish between reality and appearance, or essence and phenomena, which had lasting effects on the subsequent history of Western philosophy. In the way of truth, Parmenides presented his ontology: a real being is timeless, immobile, immutable, permanent, unborn, imperishable, one and whole. Parmenides did not discuss what that was which exists permanently, but highlighted the fact of existence as the truth. There is only one other description of the way remaining, namely that what is. To this way there are very many signposts: that being has no coming into being and no destruction, for it is whole of limb, without motion and without end. And it never was, nor will be, because it is now a whole altogether, one continuous. For what creation of it will you look for? One should both say and think that being is, for to be is possible and nothingness is impossible. Parmenides represented the real being as a sphere, a symbol of perfection for the Greeks. But since there is a spatial limit, it is complete on every side, like the mass of a well-rounded sphere, equally balanced from its center in every direction, for it is not bounding to be at all either greater or less in this direction or that. In the way of seeming, Parmenides dismissed changes and motion as illusory, which we experience as real in everyday life. In everyday parlance, we speak of absence, void, and non-being or non-existence as if they are real. Coming into being is perceived as a process from non-being to being, and disappearance from being to non-being. For Parmenides, non-being is a genuine sense, is a total absence or a sheer nothing that cannot be in principle an object of thought. What we can think of has existence by the fact of being thought. The moment one thinks something, an object of thought is posited as a being. Thinking inherently involves positing an object of thought. To think is the same as the thought that it is, for you will not find thinking without being, in regard to which there is an expression. Parmenides presented a view of truth which is known as a correspondence theory of truth. In this view, truth is defined as the accordance of idea with reality. Since Parmenides conceived the eternal and unchanging being as the sole reality, true knowledge is a realization of this being, and this knowledge is attainable not by senses but by reason alone. For this view can never predominate that which I not exist. You must debar your thought from this way of search, not let ordinary experience in its variety force you along this way, the eyes sightless as it is, and the ear full of sound, and the tongue to rule, but judge by means of the reason, the much contested proof which is expounded by me. In our everyday discourse, we distinguish beings according to their kind, mode, and sense of existence. Diversity of beings is established based upon differences in these existential characteristics. What is common to all beings is the fact of existence. Parmenides conceived the fact of existence as the common denominator to all beings and conceptualized it as the one. True knowledge is the realization of the fact of to be as the first principle of being. Our perception of diversity among beings is, for Parmenides, merely a view of mortals in the world of seeming. Overview of Parmenides' poem. Ancient tradition holds that Parmenides produced only one written work, which was supposedly entitled On Nature. This title is suspect, as it had become common even by Sextus' time to attribute this generic title to all pre-Socratic works. No copy of the original work has survived in any part. Instead, scholars have collected purported quotations from a number of ancient authors and attempted to reconstruct the poem by arranging these fragments according to internal and external evidence. The result is a rather fragmentary text constituted by approximately 154 dactylic hexameter lines. This reconstructed arrangement has been then traditionally divided into three distinct parts: an introductory section known as the proem, a central section of epistemological guidelines and metaphysical arguments, and a concluding cosmology. The linear order of the three main extant sections is certain, and the assignments of particular fragments to each section are generally well supported. However, it must be admitted that confidence in the connectedness, completeness, and internal ordering of the fragments in each section decreases significantly as one proceeds through the poem linearly. Proem, reality, opinion. Furthermore, many philological difficulties persist throughout the reconstruction. There are conflicting transmissions regarding which Greek word to read, variant punctuation possibilities, concerns surrounding adequate translation, ambiguities in the poetical form, and so forth. Given all of this, any serious engagement with Parmenides' work should begin by acknowledging the incomplete status of the text and recognizing that interpretive certainty is generally not to be found. Parmenides' poem began with a proem describing a journey he figuratively once made to the abode of a goddess. He described how he was conveyed on the far fabled path of the divinity in a chariot by a team of mares, and how the maiden daughters of Helios, the sun god, led the way. These maidens take Parmenides to whence they themselves have come, to the halls of night, before which stand the gates of the paths of night and day. The maidens gently persuade Justice, guardian of these gates, to open them so that Parmenides himself may pass through to the abode within. Parmenides thus describes how the goddess who dwells there welcomed him upon his arrival. Parmenides' proem is no epistemological allegory of enlightenment, but a topographically specific description of a mystical journey to the halls of night. In Hesiod, the horrible dwelling of dark night is where the goddess night and day alternatively reside, as the other traverses the sky above the earth. Both Parmenides and Hesiod's conception of this place have their precedent in the Babylonian mythology of the sun god's abode. This abode also traditionally served as a place of judgment, and this fact tends to confirm that when Parmenides' goddess tells him that no ill fate has sent him ahead to this place, she is indicating that he has miraculously reached the place to which travel souls of the dead. In the proem, then, Parmenides casts himself in the role of an initiate into the kind of mysteries that were during his day part of the religious milieu of Magna Graecia. The motive of the initiate is important, for it informs Parmenides' portrayal of himself as one whose encounter with a major divinity has yielded a special knowledge or wisdom. The divinity in this instance would seem to be Night herself. Parmenides goes to the halls of night, and the goddess who greets him welcomes him to our home. The goddess Night serves as a counselor to Zeus in some of the major Orphic cosmologies, including the Derveni cosmology. In the closely related Orphic rhapsodies, Night instructs Zeus on how to preserve the unity produced by his absorption of all things into himself as he sets about initiating a new cosmogonic phase. It is thus appropriate that Night should be the source of Parmenides' revelation, for Parmenidean metaphysics is very much concerned with the principle of unity in the cosmos. Thoughts on reality. Immediately following the poem moves into its central philosophical section, reality. In this section, Parmenides positively endorsed epistemic and metaphysical claims are outlined. Though lengthy quotations strongly suggest a certain internal structure, there is certainly some room for debate with respect to proper placement, in particular amongst the shorter fragments that do not share any common content with the others. In any case, due to the overall relative completeness of this section and its clearly novel philosophical content, these lines have received far more attention from philosophically minded readers in both ancient and modern times. In reality, the unnamed youth is first informed that there are only two logically possible routes of inquiry one might embark upon in order to understand reality. Parmenides' goddess endorses the first route, which recognizes that what is, and that it must be, it is not to be, on the grounds that it is completely trustworthy and persuasive. On the other hand, the goddess warns the youth away from the route which posits what is not and necessarily cannot be, as it is a path that can neither be known nor spoken of. The reasoning seems to be that along this latter route there is no concept to conceive of, no subject there to refer to, and no properties that can be predicted of nothingness. In the third possible route of inquiry, the goddess seems to warn the youth from following the path which holds being and not being to be the same and not the same. This is the path those mortals are said to wander without judgment on a backwards turning journey. Not only is confusing what is and what is not, different from positing necessary being and non-being, and thus a distinct route, but this description also seems to correspond far better to the cosmogony of opposites found in opinion than to the route of what is not and necessarily cannot be. The order not to follow the path that posits only what is further complicated by the fragmentary report that there is some sort of close relationship between thinking and being, for thinking and being are the same thing, or for the same thing is for thinking as is for being. Scholars are divided as to what the exact meaning of this relationship is supposed to be, leading to numerous mutually exclusive interpretive models. Does Parmenides really mean to make an identity claim between the two, that thinking really is numerically one and the same as being and vice versa? Or is it that there are some shared properties between the two? Is Parmenides making the rather problematic claim that whatever can be thought exists? Or more charitably, only that whatever does exist can in principle be thought of without contradiction and thus is understandable by reason, unlike nothingness? Perhaps both? Most commonly, Parmenides has been understood here as anticipating Raselian concerns with language and how meaning and reference must be coextensive with and even preceded by ontology. In any case, from these epistemic considerations, the goddess deductive arguments are supposed to follow with certainty from deductive a priori reasoning. By studiously avoiding thinking in any way which entails thinking about what is not, via reductio, the subject of reality is concluded to be truly eternal, ungenerated and imperishable, a continuous whole, unmoved and unique, perfect and uniform. For instance, since coming to be involves positing not being in the past and mutatis mutandis for perishing, and since not being cannot be conceived of, what is cannot have either property. In a similar vein, spatial motion includes not being at a current position in the past, and this motion is also denied. This line of reasoning can be readily advanced to deny any sort of change at all. In the end, what is certain about reality is that there is purportedly at least one thing that must possess all the aforementioned perfect properties, and that these properties are supposed to follow from one problem with thinking about what is not. It has been commonly inferred from this that Parmenides advocated that there is actually just one thing in the entire world, and that this entity necessarily possesses the aforementioned properties. Now, please try to answer a few questions. First one, what are the salient features of the eleatic school of thought? How can we relate Parmenides' ideas with monism? What are the ontological arguments of Parmenides? Explain the philosophy of Parmenides. Narrate the metaphysical elements of Parmenides' philosophy. Critically analyze the Parmenides' thoughts on reality. Why Parmenides is credited as father of metaphysics. Books for further reading: Die Fragmente der Vorsokratiker, 6th edition by H. Diels and W. Kranz, Berlin, 1951. Parmenides sur la nature ou sur et la langue de et Paris by B. Cassin, 1998. Parmenides les Poèmes Fragments by M. Conche, Paris, Presses Universitaires de France, 1996. Les Deux Chemins de Parmenides by N. Cordero, 1984. Hope you have enjoyed this session. Thank you for watching this program. Goodbye.